Welcome to my channel, African Tales with IK. Let's start video. The Mysterious Old Man. In the heart of a vast African savanna, where golden grass swayed with the whispers of the wind and mighty baobab trees stood like ancient guardians, lived an old man named Nuru. No one knew where he had come from or how long he had been in the village, but for as long as anyone could remember, he had been there, sitting beneath the grandest baobab tree, telling stories as the sun dipped below the horizon. But Nuru was no ordinary storyteller. His tales were not just entertainment, they were prophecies. Whenever he spoke of something, it inevitably came to pass. Some villagers feared him, whispering that he had made a pact with unseen spirits. Others revered him, seeking his wisdom before making life-altering decisions. But no one could deny the truth. Nuru knew the future. The village of Tambarar thrived under Nuru's guidance. When he spoke of an impending drought, the villagers dug deep wells before the rivers dried up. When he foretold an invasion by raiders, they fortified their homes and were prepared. His knowledge was a shield, a guiding light that saved many lives. Yet Nuru never used his gift for personal gain. He refused gifts, taking only a bowl of millet porridge each evening from the villagers. To him, knowledge was a burden, not a privilege. Some villagers often wondered, did Nuru know his own fate? Would he ever tell a story about himself? The boy who wanted to know his fate. Among the children who gathered to listen to Nuru's tales was a boy named Kofi. Unlike others, Kofi wasn't just fascinated by the stories, was obsessed. He wanted to know how Nuru saw the future. One night, after the other villagers had dispersed, Kofi stayed behind. "Grandfather Nuru," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell me about my future?" The old man gazed at the boy with eyes that seemed to pierce through time itself. "The future is a river, Kofi," he said. "One can see its direction, but not always its depth." But Kofi was persistent. He begged Nuru for a story, one that would reveal his destiny. That night, for the first time, Nuru told a story about someone present. "There once was a boy," he began, "who was destined to rule a kingdom, but he did not know it. He wandered the lands, lost and confused, until the day he found a hidden truth about himself. The villagers who were still awake overheard the words and gasped. Could it be true? Was Kofi meant for greatness? The boy's heart pounded with excitement. He had always dreamed of being more than just a herdsman's son. But how could such a thing be possible? Kofi's father, a humble herdsman, dismissed the story as mere fantasy. "Nuru's tales are riddles," he said. "Do not fill your head with dreams." But the village chief was less skeptical. He summoned Nuru the next morning. "Tell me, old one," the chief demanded, "did you speak the truth?" Nuru smiled. "I only tell what I see." The chief was troubled. If Kofi was destined for greatness, could he become a threat to his rule? A dangerous secret. Word of Nuru's prophecy spread beyond the village. One night, a group of masked warriors stormed into Tambarar, searching for Kofi. "Kill the boy before he finds his throne," their leader shouted. But Nuru had foreseen this. He had told Kofi's mother to send him away that very morning. The boy was already deep in the forest, running toward an unknown destiny. Kofi traveled for days, guided by Nuru's words. He followed the river until he reached a great mountain, where he met a warrior who told him of an abandoned kingdom. "The king's heir was lost years ago," the warrior said. "Some say he lives among common folk." Kofi's heart pounded. Could he be that heir? As Kofi explored the ruins, an old woman appeared. She studied his face, then gasped. "You have your father's eyes," she whispered. She told him the truth. He was the lost prince of a fallen kingdom. His parents had been betrayed, and he had been smuggled away as an infant. Now it was time for him to reclaim his birthright. The weight of destiny. Kofi sat in the ruins of the lost kingdom, his heart heavy with the truth. He was not just a boy from Tambarare, was a prince. The knowledge both thrilled and terrified him. How could he reclaim a kingdom that had been lost for so long? The old woman, who had once served his parents, handed him a golden pendant. "This belonged to your father," she said. "It is proof of who you are." But proof was not enough. He needed an army, he needed allies, and most of all, he needed to believe in himself. The war for the throne. As Kofi pondered his next move, he heard footsteps. A group of warriors, dressed in dark armor, emerged from the trees. They were the same ones who had attacked his village. Their leader, a scarred man with cruel eyes, laughed. "So, the lost prince has finally been found." Kofi had no weapon, no defense, only his wits. He remembered Nuru's stories, how cleverness often won over brute strength. "I am not alone," Kofi said boldly. At that moment, the old woman blew a horn, and from the shadows a band of hidden rebels appeared. They had been waiting for their king. The battle for the throne had begun. The power of stories. As the battle raged, Kofi found himself outmatched. He had never been trained as a warrior, but he had learned something far more powerful: how to inspire. "They call me the Lost Prince," he shouted, "but I have always been here. This land belongs to us all." His words ignited something deep within the rebels. They fought with renewed strength, and one by one, the enemy warriors fell. Kofi had discovered that leadership was not about blood, it was about belief. The last betrayal. Victory seemed close when suddenly an arrow struck Kofi's arm. He fell to the ground, gasping in pain. From the shadows, the scarred leader stepped forward, grinning. "Did you think an untrained boy could defeat me?" But before he could strike the final blow, a voice echoed through the battlefield. "You underestimate the power of a story." Nuru had arrived. He raised his hand, and as if the wind itself carried his words, he spoke of the scarred warrior's past, off how he had once been a coward who betrayed his own king. The enemy forces hesitated. Their leader had lied to them. In that moment of doubt, Kofi's rebels struck the final blow, and the battle was won. The return of the king. The enemy had fallen. Kofi, weak from his wound, was lifted onto the shoulders of his people. They cheered his name. "The king has returned." The old woman placed a golden crown upon his head. He had reclaimed his birthright, but he knew that a true ruler was not made by a throne. He turned to Nuru. "What now?" The old man smiled. "Now you tell your own story." Years passed, and Kofi ruled with wisdom. He did not sit in a palace but walked among his people. He made sure no child ever had to wonder where they belonged. But one evening, as the sun set behind the baobab tree, he found Nuru sitting in his usual place. "You always knew this would happen," Kofi said. "Did you know how it would end?" The old storyteller smiled. "All stories must end, my son, even mine." The next morning, Nuru was gone, leaving only an empty seat beneath the tree. The storyteller lives on. Though Nuru had vanished, his stories remained, and Kofi made sure they were never forgotten. Every evening, he gathered the children of his kingdom beneath the great tree and told them stories not of war, but of wisdom, kindness, and courage. And so the storyteller lived on, not in flesh, but in the hearts of those who listened. For as long as stories were told, the future would always be known.